Hi, everyone. Welcome to our bi-weekly Hangout on Air series. I'm Krista Seiden, Analytics Advocate with Google. And today I'm joined by Marcia Jung, Product Manager for Data Import, and Niranjan Shastry, and he's an engineer on Google Analytics. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm really excited because today we're going to talk about data import and how we bridge the gap by augmenting our Google Analytics data with offline data. So I think it's a really exciting topic, and we're going to dig in just a moment. But before we do, quick reminders as always. So please feel free to submit your questions as we go through the Hangout on Air. We love questions, and we have some very intelligent people here to answer them today for you guys. So you can use the HOA chat box, and we'll moderate that and make sure that we get those questions answered. Or if you prefer, there's a form, there's a link here. There's also a link in the invite for the HOA. So go ahead and submit your questions at any point throughout the HOA. We'll answer them at the end. And with that, let's go ahead and dig right in.
Great, thanks, Krista. So as you all are likely familiar with, getting data into Google Analytics, at least the standard set of data, is quite simple. You're familiar with placing the standard JavaScript tag on your site or within your app, and you're magically able to see a set of hundreds of different reports within Google Analytics with hundreds of different dimensions that really jumpstart you out of the gate so that you can start to do really lots of interesting and deep analysis within your web data.
Yep.
But in reality, you have data that lives across multiple different enterprise systems. So for example, you may have customer data within your CRM systems that have information about demographic information, maybe what category spend they are, as well as lots of other attributes about your customers. In addition, you may have a content management system that stores attributes about your content that you may be interested in doing analysis on. So for example, information about authors or categories surrounding your content. And of course, there are a slew of other enterprise systems that you may want to actually augment your Google Analytics data with so that you can start to answer more detailed or specific questions. So for example, product catalog information, availability information, ERP systems, or really any other sort of custom databases that store business information within your organization. And what really allows you to tie all of that data together within Google Analytics is data import. And this is really what it allows you to do is add business context to your Google Analytics data so that you can get much more specific about the types of business questions that you're looking to answer.
Yeah, so on that note, maybe a business question, something like this. If you're a publisher, you may want to know which authors attract the most valuable customers and thus deserve a bonus. So in Google Analytics today, we can look at a standard page view report. Well, we'll see a list of all of the different pages and the number of users coming to that page. So it's great, but that doesn't necessarily get us to the answer that we're looking for. But we also have data across other areas of our organizations, like you pointed out, Marcia. So we have a content management system. So maybe in there we have all of our pages and then a list of which authors belong to which pages. And then we also have a customer relationship management system, our CRM system. And in there, we may have a user ID for all of the users that are coming to our site and a value attached to them for how frequently they come or how valuable we think they are as customers. So if we were to use data import and put all of this information back into Google Analytics and tie it together, we can actually get a report that looks kind of like this, where you have author by value by users. And then we can start to answer the question that we saw at the beginning, which was, which author attracts the most high-value users? And in this case, it looks like Jody's killing it. He's got a very high-value set of a lot of users.
Great, thanks, Krista. So now just to delve into a little bit more specifics about data import, Google Analytics supports three main types of data import. The first one being reference data. And what reference data refers to is the ability to join new data sets with existing data within Google Analytics. And what this requires is a common join key, which exists within the Google Analytics data set, as well as within the imported data set. And here are sort of 6 default examples of different reference data set types. So the first one being user data. That's the example that Krista showed where we're actually pulling in from, let's say, a CRM system. and that's keyed off of the user ID. So we have a user ID within Google Analytics, and you also have one within your incoming data set. And what we're able to do is join that data onto what we have within GA so that you can start to segment or do roll-ups based off of user attributes. Other examples of reference data are, for example, campaign data, where you may be keying off of campaign ID, content, which is potentially keyed off of page URL, product, which is, of course, product SKU, geo ID, which we'll show an example of later, as well as the ability to do custom data joins as well. So this is a really powerful capability to, again, add additional context to your Google Analytics data. Mm-hmm. The second data import type that I want to cover is hit data. And this is really representing kind of net new hits to Google Analytics. Mm-hmm. So whereas reference data was simply joining on existing or attributes to existing data, hit data import is actually introducing brand new hits to Google Analytics. And an example of this is refund data, where you can actually upload a file that contains all information about all the different refunds that may have occurred within your organization, and then send that to GA for analysis. Mm-hmm. And the final data import type that I want to highlight is summary data. And this is a bit different from the other two in that we're, again, joining onto existing data within Google Analytics, but this is specifically uploading metrics where we'll actually sum and join that onto existing data. And an example of that is cost data import, where you're actually able to import cost data from all your different marketing channels so that you can do, for example, ROAS analysis across all the different digital marketing campaigns that you have running.
That's a lot of different types that can be very powerful.
Yes, very flexible framework to really accommodate all the different use cases.
Nice.
Now, just to delve a little deeper into the reference data use case, we support two different import modes for reference data, and this is processing time and query time. Processing time is actually available to all Google Analytics standard users, and what this entails is uploading the reference data set and, in advance, and then all subsequent data that comes through GA, through that JavaScript tag, let's say, will then join on the reference data to new hits. Query time is actually a really powerful capability that's reserved for our premium customers, and it actually allows you to upload reference data after the fact, and then we apply it to all historical data.
So really powerful. Yep. I remember when we first announced this, I think I literally jumped out of my seat. I was so excited that we could now do this at query time.
Exactly. And what query time allows you to do is kind of really address the needs of highly dynamic businesses, where you can't anticipate every type of analysis or categorization that you want to do in advance. It allows you to set these up after the fact and then do a lot of ad hoc dynamic analysis. Mm-hmm. So recently, we've continued to invest further in the data import feature, and I wanted to highlight just three recent launches that we've done. The first being the addition of geographical ID data import, and this is a really powerful feature to actually augment kind of the geo information that we have within Google Analytics. So we heard from a lot of customers that they would like to do categorization of city, country, region, or even subcontinent based off of their organization's understanding of geo. So we've added that capability, and again, Niranjan will actually be able to show us an example of that. We've also added support for user ID data import for query time. So this is something brand new. It's in whitelist for premium customers, and we'll actually have a whitelist sign up link at the end of the Hangout for users to go ahead and sign up for this feature.
Perfect. Definitely, if you guys didn't catch that whitelist link at the end, sign up for these new features.
And what this allows us to do is join dynamic user attributes for analysis and segmentation with query time data import. And the final capability that we've recently added is full segmentation support using query time join data. So again, when we talked about the ability to import data after the fact and apply it to all historical data, we know that you don't want to just do reporting. We know you want to actually do segmentation and deep analysis of your data sets. So this is something that we've added and we're really excited about. And just as a quick refresher for those of you who may not be as familiar with how data import is set up, it's really a three-step process. The first being defining your data set. And I talked about a few different examples, whether it was for user ID data import or product catalog data import. You'll simply define what that join key is, as well as the different fields of data that you want to join. So that's, again, defining kind of what that data set is. The second step is uploading a file, which actually contains this information. And we also have a management API that allows you to, or an API that allows you to set this up programmatically as well. And then once you've done those two steps, you'll see in the third step that this data appears in those end user reports. And to help bring this more to life, I wanted to pass it over to Niranjan, who can do a live demo of the data import capabilities.
Yeah, awesome. He's going to show us exactly what Marcia was just talking about, all of those steps, and we're going to see this live.
Thanks, guys. All right. For the demo, I'm going to be looking at the geography report based on location. If you look at the report, it gives you a whole bunch of GA metrics against countries. And while this is pretty useful, let's say I, as a business, want to group things further. So, for example, I want to group the US and Canada as North America, Germany and the UK are Europe, so on and so forth, so that I get a better high-level picture of how my business is doing. So let's see how we can go about achieving this. To start with, we define a custom dimension called sales region, which is kind of my notion of what my category of regions are. This will be saved as a custom dimension, provided there is any left. If not, you could repurpose an existing dimension to do this. Now, if we go back to the report, initially, we don't have any data for that. So if I add the sales region to this, we should see an empty report because we don't have anything set up, so there's going to be nothing in it. So as expected, the data is empty. So the next step here is to actually go to the data import UI on the admin console and define a new data set for us to import what we want. So if I click on new data set, these show all the different types that we support today as shown by Marcia in the presentation. And for this demo, I'm going to be using the geography data type. So on the next page, again, these are the two different types or the modes that we call them that you can set this up as, either processing or query time. Query time is like instant. You can see whatever your data that you uploaded instantly on the reports. So I'm going to be choosing query time for this purpose. Note that they behave exactly the same way on the report. It's just how things work internally that's different. So if you upload the same thing via processing time, you'll still be able to see the data on your reports. But there's kind of some differences in how they behave. In the next step, we give it a name. And we can link it to one or all of the views that are associated with this property. So what this does is only the ones that we select here are going to see the data that we upload. And all the other views are going to see whatever came with the head through the JavaScript.
Sure. So one interesting piece about being able to select this view with query time is that this is actually not changing historical data. This is actually being applied in real time, or on the fly when the user queries the data, so that in fact you can actually use processing time as well as query time together. So processing time would only apply to new incoming hits, and then you can do query time upon analysis, and it doesn't actually go back and change the historical data. It's simply changing the view when the user queries that data.
Thanks.
Very cool.
The next step is the most important one, where we kind of define the mapping. In our case, we want to map every country to its own sales region. So the key is going to be one of these 4 geo-based keys. And for this demo, we'll use the country ISO code. And what it maps to is the new custom dimension that we set up called sales region. So this kind of sets up what the metadata is for this data set. It maps from country to our own GA dimension. So you can go ahead and save this. And I've already done this for the purpose of this demo. So what this does is it creates a new data set, which is similar to what you see here. and the schema is going to be the country code and the sales region dimension.
So if I could just interrupt for a second, you mentioned ISO code. Is that some kind of a standard? What is that?
Yep, so it's a 2-character standard code that represents every country that Google Analytics tracks. So it is an international standard, so it's something that a lot of our users would be familiar with.
Okay, great. So kind of like, what is it, DMA for region?
Exactly.
Got it.
Right. So in the next step, we upload our user file. And let me first upload it before I show it to you. So while this goes up, it's a pretty simple CSV file where the first line is the schema for this data set, which is the mapping. And every other line is what we call as a rule, which tells us what each country represented by its ISO code maps to as a region, which is our notion of what our sales regions are. Now, the good thing about this is if, let's say, tomorrow or maybe next quarter, things change and you want to group all of America as one and not as South, North, and Central, all you need to do is change this file, which is like map all the countries to one single entity called America, upload the file again, and refresh your reports, and you should see the change taking effect almost immediately. So if we go back here, it looks like the data has been uploaded. So we typically promise that it takes up to 24 hours for the data to flow through. But in reality, it's a lot faster. Sometimes it's like in 10 minutes. So that kind of depends on the load on our system, but it hardly ever takes 24 hours.
And with geography ID data import, we actually support widening or categorization also at the city level and subcontinent. And what was is it region?
There are 4 different IDs that you can use. So for example, let me go back to creating a new data set. And there we can see.
Great.
So if you go back to creating a new data, choose query time again. Let's call this geo. View. So these are the 4 different IDs that you can choose. They go in sort of increasing order of geographical area from city, country, region to a subcontinent. So you could choose any one of these.
Great.
Right. So let's go back to our report where we had sales region as the secondary dimension. So this should now get all the data that we just uploaded. And sometimes we hit the cache. So I'm going to change the date ranges a little bit so that we don't hit our caches. Let's make it 10 and 10.
And so I think one interesting piece here is that, again, we already had this data with that Google Analytics had collected. And so what Niranjan is doing is actually recategorizing data that has already been collected within by Google Analytics. By contrast, had we done processing time, that would appear here automatically.
So let me regenerate the report. So as I said, it takes like close to 10 minutes,
Sure.
Give or take a minute or 2.
So if we have that whole list of countries that we've uploaded, what happens if we have data coming in from a country that's not represented in that list?
Data from a country that's not represented. In that case, we'll actually not, we'll simply have sales region as not set.
Okay.
And then what it allows you to do is you can actually add that after the fact. You'll notice that, for example, that particular country has not been categorized.
Right.
So you can actually drill into that not set row or roll up, and then look at which countries have not been categorized. Then add that to the CSV file, apply
re-upload it, and then you've solved your not set problem there, because now you have a longer list of countries.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Right. So this report is the same one that we got no results for before the data upload, and now we can see that all the mappings that we set up through the file are actually showing up in our reports.
Awesome.
So the other thing you can do is also create a custom dimension, custom report with just the sales region, so that you can see things at a much higher granularity.
Okay.
So you can just say, you know, how did all the regions in the Americas do versus Europe, so on and so forth. So for the second part of the demo, I'm going to be using this as a segment. So we'll go to the e-commerce shopping analysis, shopping behavior report. So what we can do is create a segment which is based off the data that we just uploaded.
Mm-hmm.
So segmentation itself is not new, but creating a segment with something that we just uploaded, that's kind of something new that we released. So I've already created a segment called the Americas, and what it does is it's based on the sales region containing the term America in it. And we can already see that about half of them satisfy this criteria. So
basically, you have your whole shopping funnel, and now you're narrowing it down to just what the classifications that you just made. So North America, South America, Central America, you're calling those all the Americas.
Right.
That wasn't data we originally had in Google Analytics,
right.
but you uploaded that and classified it into these data sets now.
Right.
So now you're able to look at the shopping funnel specifically for users who are coming from the America sales region.
Yeah.
So you can get much more targeted in terms of types of analysis that you're looking to do. So you can see how many users are dropping off within the shopping funnel at various stages, specifically for the Americas region. Mm-hmm. And then you can actually look at this table below, and you can see, again, what's the breakout for all the different attributes within that user base. So new versus returning, again, different campaign sources. You can start to see how are users within this region behaving differently from, say, the broader group.
Great.
It's also possible to compare a single product across different regions.
Right.
So you know which products are popular in what.
So you can look at the Americas versus India or whatnot, or however you're classifying your own sales regions, which may not be how the rest of the world does.
Exactly. So you can see which products are most popular for users that are coming from a particular region. This can start to inform the different marketing campaigns that you're running, so that you're, again, targeting those users with the most relevant products.
Very cool.
And that's it.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's jump back into the slides. I think we had some more. Yep.
Yeah. So what Niranjan has just demoed for us is, again, the query time data import capabilities that are specifically reserved for premium customers. One thing that I did want to highlight are just a couple of limits or need to know when using query time data import. The first being that query time doesn't actually export to BigQuery. And the reason we don't do that is because you can simply upload that same file to BigQuery and then do the join within that system. It's a fairly simple join. Second, it does not support remarketing lists. So for example, let's say that you have a newly uploaded data. We can't actually recategorize or set up a remarketing list based off of those newly uploaded attributes. Third, for those of you who are using our cohort reports, those are not reflected with query time data import, nor multi-channel funnels or the real-time data. So these are simply some things to be aware of when you're using query time data import. And I won't spend too much time on this slide. These are just some quotas. They're also available within our Help Center documentation so that you can understand what the basic quotas are for data import. Note that for premium, you have a much larger quota limits, again, because our premium customers are the ones that are taking extensive advantage of the tool.
Great. So with that, I think we've made it through the majority of our content in our demo. So we're going to go into Q&A here in a minute. But before we do, I wanted to remind you guys of all of the amazing resources that we have. So of course, we have the Analytics Help Center, support.google.com/analytics. And we also have the Analytics Academy, which is a great resource for all sorts of topics. We have classes on digital analytics, fundamentals and platform principles, mobile and e-commerce. And we just wrapped up our newest course, GTM. But you can definitely still take the course and view all of the content online. And then we have the GA Premium Google Plus community, which you guys should all be aware of, since I think you're logging into this Hangout on there through there. So it's a great place to have conversations, ask questions, interact with each other, interact with us, and learn from your peers. And then finally, as Marcia mentioned earlier, if you're interested in signing up for the whitelist for the new user ID features, definitely copy down that, that form link. We're going to leave these slides up for just a minute after we go into Q&A. And then if you want to hit us up on social, at Google Analytics on Twitter, or I'm at Krista Seiden on Twitter. So just before we jump into questions, let me just remind you all again, please put them in. We would love to take your questions and answer them right now. And I wanted to give another thank you to you guys for joining me today. It's been a really insightful session, and I think our users are going to get a lot out of this.
Thanks, Krista.
So, all right, let's kick it off with our first question. So Damien would like to know, he'd like to upload data to overwrite the content group labels associated with unique URL parts. Is it possible to use data import in this way to correct existing content grouping data?
That's an interesting question. Currently, that's not something that we've exposed through the data import feature. It's something that we can definitely take as a feature request if that's something that's interesting to our users. Currently, our recommendation for that is simply to create a custom dimension for your various content dimensions that you're looking to import, and simply augmenting the data in that way. If there are specific needs for overwriting kind of the existing classifications for content groups, we're definitely open to feedback.
Great. So get your feedback in if you want something new. All right, so here's a question from Alan. Alan wants to know, it's great that we can import new data into GA. Yes, it is. If we're not importing anything just yet, how should we get started? Any ideas for prioritizing or creating a plan, or what are the baby steps to getting started with data import?
Again, this is something that I think we get a lot, and I'm sure you do as well, Krista. What we really recommend, even before kind of looking at the specifics of any feature, you really want to understand or really have an analytics framework or a strategy in place in terms of what types of questions are you looking to answer, what are your KPIs, and what are the data sources that you need to be able to include to answer those types of questions. So once you've kind of set up what that end goal is or what that framework needs to be, then it becomes a lot more clear what types of data sources you need to actually include in order to really answer those questions. So for example, if you are an e-commerce business and you want to get much more detailed in terms of the types of product categorizations and roll-ups that you're looking to do, or even including, let's say, margin data associated with those products, then it makes sense to actually use the product data import capabilities. The publisher example that you mentioned, again, is a completely different type of business and a different type of set of questions that you're looking to answer. So it really does depend on what kind of the use cases are that you're looking to solve, and then identifying the data sources that help you answer those questions, and then delving into the specifics of the data import feature.
Great. So Jennifer wants to know, once data is imported, can we segment or build custom reports as we can with normal data, and what other things should we be doing? Well, I think you showed us examples of this, right?
Yes. So the answer is yes. With query time data import now, you're able to absolutely create custom reports and segmentation based off of that newly imported reference data. I think there was a slide on kind of a few caveats to be aware of in terms of some of the other like multi-channel funnel reports. But by and large, all the types of rich analysis that you're looking to do are capable through query time data import. For processing time data import, which is again applied in advance or set up in advance and then applied to new data, that's actually compatible with all your standard Google Analytics data, and it acts as if it were sent natively with the GA tag.
Yep, cool. So Ben wants to know, should we be concerned with importing too much data to Google Analytics? I.e., are hit limits something to think about, or is it a good idea to just import everything we can think of?
So in general, this is just a personal preference. I don't like to kind of throw the kitchen sink into Google Analytics simply because I think it's very difficult for users to get meaningful insights out of that. So I like to be much more mindful about the types of data that you are sending to Google Analytics. That said, I think the question of are there any limits or should I be aware of any hit limits? If you recall, when I talked about the different types of data import, I said that there were 3 different types of data import. There's only one, which is the hit data import, which introduces what I call net new hits to Google Analytics, which would, again, go to your hit quota limits. But the rest of the other data import types, like reference data and cost data, those do not impact kind of your hit quota limits, and there aren't any limits in that regard.
Great. So since you mentioned cost data, Lauren actually has a question about return data. So she says it's really interesting, and it's not something they're currently looking at within Google Analytics. So do you have any best practices for how to go about doing return data in Google Analytics? And are there any caveats that they should keep in mind?
Sure. So that refund data or return data feature is specific to enhanced e-commerce.
Okay.
So that's one thing to be aware of. It needs to actually match an existing transaction ID within Google Analytics within the last, I believe, 6 months. So then you're able to upload refunds and send them to us, and then we'll actually do the lookup historically to understand what that original transaction looked like.
Okay.
And then we can automatically refund that data when you send us that refund file. One thing to be aware of is that refund date is associated with the date of the refund, not of the original transaction. So that's just something to be aware of when you're doing analysis. Right. And then, of course, you can create, let's say, a calculated metric to actually find the difference between the original value and the refunded value.
Right. And I guess just kind of very simply, users should be aware that if they've exported that data, it's not going to have the new information in there. And so when you re-export data, be aware that it may have changed a little bit because you now have some return data in there or some refund data. Great. So I've got one more question. Last call, get your questions into the HOA window. We'd be happy to answer them here. So that is, can you share some success stories with data import or just a really awesome use case that you've heard of? And what types of users are having early success with this?
Sure. So I think that there are lots, of course. I think we talked about product and content, but my personal favorite is definitely the user ID data import feature, because that really allows you to get much more specific around user analysis. So things like content and product-based analysis are kind of, to me, like bread and butter to what you need to do. And then I think kind of the most advanced marketers are understanding that being able to do interesting user-based analysis is kind of that next step in terms of like the evolution of analytics and marketing that you want to do. So I think we showed a couple of different examples. One was a very basic segmentation of kind of high value users versus, I don't think we would call them low value users, but other types of sort of segmentation of different user bases. And I think some of our customers are doing really interesting customer segmentation in that way, so that they're trying to actually move users from group to group. So for example, like one-time buyers who have spent, a certain value with their brand, they actually want to target those users to make them more sticky and turn them into loyal users. So I think that's a great example of how you can actually use this data import feature to actually start to get much more specific and move the needle in terms of like business metrics as well.
Awesome. Niranjan, do you have anything to share, add there? Any cool use cases you've seen?
I've seen a lot of people use it for campaign widening, which is pretty useful.
Okay.
As well as product, because people have a product catalog which they just upload once, and then the hit that you send is incredibly small.
Okay.
And we do all the work of widening it for you.
Great.
So for people like Amazon or anybody else who has a big catalog, they just upload it once and then everything happens magically.
So I think that is actually also a technical benefit of data import. So the specific hit size that gets sent from by either the app or the page can be much smaller if you're using the data import feature.
Interesting.
So instead of having, let's say, the 20 different attributes, whether it's on the campaign or on the product, sent within the hit, you can make that much more compact and simply send us that ID, that join key, and then use the data import feature to actually enrich a lot of that data.
Awesome.
And you don't have to send things which you don't feel comfortable, like the price or the amount of discount, for example.
Nice.
They
So it's a
can go
good way to
securely in a
send
file.
just what you want and nothing more.
Yeah, you just send the
Exactly.
ID in the JavaScript and that's it.
Right. So exactly, like sensitive information, either about users or margin data, for example, our customers feel much more comfortable sending that directly to us as opposed to kind of setting those values on the page or within that.
Makes a lot of sense.
Great.
Well, thank you so much again for taking the time to share with our users all of this really valuable information about data import. And thank you guys for joining us. We will see you again in a couple of weeks. We have an upcoming HOA on BigQuery use cases with Breen Baker, who's our product manager for that. And we also have 2 weeks after that, I think, in mid-September, a update on Google Analytics Premium with our Google Analytics evangelist, Justin Catroni. And him and I will also be doing an open Q&A session to take your guys' questions. So I think with that, that wraps us up for today. Thank you guys so much for joining. Have a good one.
Thanks.